So when I first started out with this channel, the whole thinking behind it was that I wanted to create a channel that provided tutorials and information about how to play this specific variant of pool that we play here in the UK. Now, I'm obviously aware that all around the world there are lots of different names for different types of pool, and there are lots of different variants of pool. Just to clear that up so everyone knows what I'm referring to, over here this is the most common form of pool, and we would just call that pool, sometimes English pool. The game on the larger tables we refer to in this country as American pool, and again, obviously in America they just refer to that as pool. And there are lots of differences between those games. There are obviously lots of other variants as well. You've got Chinese 8-ball and other games, and they are all different, and there are many differences that make each one unique. And there are lots of videos on YouTube about the more common American pool, so I wanted to make something that was very specific to this game. Now, in particular, in this video, the thing I want to focus on is something that is very different and unique to this game, and that's the cue ball. In English pool, the cue ball is smaller than the object ball and lighter as well. The object balls are 2 inches, and the cue ball is 1 7/8 of an inch, and the object ball weighs about 118 grams, whereas the cue ball only weighs 96 grams. And the fact that this is smaller and lighter makes a huge difference in how it reacts when it contacts an object ball. In other forms of pool, snooker, American pool, the cue ball, I haven't got a cue ball, but the cue ball is exactly the same as the object ball, both in size and in weight. So the way that they react is different than how a smaller cue ball reacts. And it's really important to understand those differences, especially if you are moving from one form of pool or snooker to the other. Things are not going to behave exactly the same way in both, and it's important to understand why. So what I'm going to cover in this video is some of the differences that make having this smaller cue ball so unique. So you might think that the cue ball being slightly smaller and lighter won't make much difference, but hopefully these next few examples will explain the difference it does make. Now, I always think it helps to explain things when you compare the extremes. So I'm going to play the same shot with a yellow ball as the cue ball, which is exactly the same size and weight as the red object ball, just like the cue ball in American pool or snooker. An English cue ball, which is a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter than the object ball, and a ping pong ball, which is smaller and much lighter than the object ball. I'm then playing a fairly soft shot, striking the cue ball dead centre and hitting the object ball full ball. With the equal size and weight cue ball, the cue ball travels forward about 3 or 4 inches after the impact. If you remember any physics from school, then you might remember that in a collision there are equal and opposite forces applied to both objects. I won't bore you with the maths involved, but the force on the red is to the right and speeds it up, and the force on the yellow is to the left and slows it down. If we then do the exact same shot with the ping pong ball, the red hardly moves and the ping pong ball comes back in the opposite direction. Again, going back to school, you might remember that the mass of the object is part of these calculations. So because the mass of the ping pong ball is so small, the force to the right on the red ball is not enough to move it, but the force to the left on the ping pong ball speeds it up to the left. So having seen that extreme, we should expect that when we use the lighter English cue ball, the result will be different to when we use the yellow. The cue ball's mass is much closer to that of the yellow than the ping pong ball, so it won't be anywhere near as extreme, but we should expect the forces to cause the balls to react differently. And as you can see, the red doesn't travel quite as far, and the white is slowed down a little quicker than the yellow. We also know that the velocity is part of these equations, so increasing that will also make a difference to what happens in the collision. The increased velocity means that with the equal mass cue ball, the red speeds up more and travels further, but the force to the left is also increased and the yellow comes to a stop quicker. With more velocity on the ping pong ball, there's just enough force to actually move the red this time, but the increased force in the opposite direction means that the ping pong ball travels even further than it did before. And the increased velocity on the white ball means that the opposite force is now enough to actually send the cue ball back in the other direction. So again, it's clear to see the difference between the white and yellow cue balls. So knowing that the smaller mass of the English cue ball means there is more force in the opposite direction than there is with an equal mass cue ball, means that playing screw back is easier with the English cue ball. If we watch these two shots played side by side with equal power, you can see that the white cue ball screws back much further with the same amount of effort. I'm obviously not a machine and I can't say that both shots were played at exactly the same speed, but they were fairly close and the resulting difference is quite clear. So again, because of the smaller mass, it stands to reason that playing topspin is harder with the English cue ball. If we watch these two shots, side by side, both played with topspin, the yellow travels much further forward than the white ball, and again with the same amount of effort. This is because there's more force acting back against the white in the opposite direction than there is on the yellow. Now, there's actually a second reason why playing topspin with the smaller cue ball is harder, and the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that in that last video. For those that didn't, let's have a closer look at the reaction in slow motion. As you can see, as the yellow impacts the red, it bounces back a little, and then the topspin takes hold and accelerates the ball to the right. However, when you watch the English cue ball, not only does it bounce back further due to its smaller mass, it also jumps into the air just a fraction. During its time in the air, the topspin is having no effect as there is no cloth to grip against, and by the time it lands again, some of that topspin has been lost. This happens because the English cue ball is also smaller than the object ball. Because it's smaller, when they collide, the ball is pushed back down into the bed of the table, which then causes it to jump up again. So because of the mass and the size of the English cue ball, these two factors combine to make topspin harder to generate than with an equal size cue ball. The way the cue ball reacts also affects the shape of the path of the cue ball after impact. I've set up a shot to the corner here that's just off straight, giving us a tangent line in this direction. If we play with an equal cue ball, struck dead centre or plain ball at a medium pace, then the cue ball rolls forward from the tangent line almost immediately and down into the cushion. If we play exactly the same shot with the smaller cue ball, then any slight forward momentum is counteracted by the extra force of the larger object ball on the white, and the cue ball stays on the tangent line just like a stun shot. If we play with topspin at the same pace, then the yellow contacts the cushion just where it did before, but with more pace and continues to roll for longer, coming back up the table. With topspin on the smaller cue ball, the white jumps back a little bit from the tangent line, and then the topspin pulls the ball forwards towards the cushion. Because of this slight arc in the path, it makes contact more to the left than the yellow did, and doesn't travel as far because the topspin is weaker. Played firmly with topspin, the yellow still hits the cushion in roughly the same place, but travels even further along the same line. With the smaller cue ball, however, it bounces back from the tangent line even further and creates a bigger arc, actually striking the cushion further to the left than it did when played softer, although it now has extra topspin which makes it travel that bit further. So as you can see, the smaller cue ball gives you much more variance in the shape of the path. Knowing where the cue ball is going is vitally important to positional play, and the longer you play the game, the more instinctively you get a feel for this in your chosen variant of cue sport. However, anyone moving from one form to another really needs to understand the differences and be able to adjust their shots accordingly. If If you want to see more practice routines and pool tutorials, then please remember to subscribe. And if you're interested in any of the equipment I use in this video, then there are links in the description below.